After having looked at the beginnings of first year composition, I wanted to explore and try to decipher how it is that today we are teaching students to become better writers. The goal of this podcast is to try to see how do you teach to write to all subjects. And by that I mean that it is very difficult to look at how it is that we teach, because teaching, as I've found through my courses, is very difficult. It's hard to look at one single pedagogy and say that this is the correct and best way to do so. Therefore, I intend to try to look at one of possible ways to help teachers to better teach. Now, there is, if I may be honest, there is no easy way to do it. There is far too many ways to teach, and as Richard Ferguson points out, from the 1980s to the early 2000s, so 2001, he points out their books that were thought to teach, they went ahead and actually went up in the idea of how many pedagogies there are. He points out that it begins with 8 approaches in the 1980s, and then by 2001 we have 12 pedagogies. And it's interesting to me that the more we look at ways to teach, the more ways there are to teach. Yet we have still not found the best solution to teach students. Therefore, I endeavor to look at a few ideas on the subject. Pertaining to Fulkerson, he's a bit of a critic on the regards of, or criticizes very much, how it is that there are so many of them. In particular, he takes a huge stance, it seems, against. For Ferguson, he takes very much a critical approach against what is critical pedagogy, cultural as well as feminist pedagogies, in that he feels that these approaches push towards an agenda that doesn't correlate with the actual teaching of writing. For him, all three focus on having students read about systemic cultural injustices inflicted by dominant societal groups and dominant discourses on those with less power, and upon the empowering possibilities of rhetoric if students are educated to read carefully and resist the social text that help keep some groups subordinate. Now, it is a very good idea to teach some of these methods because they help in crafting the student's mind in a way that looks at the world more critically. However, there are some issues with this because I, somewhat like Fulkerson, feel that teaching writing should be the main objective of a compositional course. What I think is that we should focus heavily on writing in the composition course, but we should definitely give allowances to the methods that can be used by other disciplines. And in this sort of regard, it brings up another sort of issue that comes up with the teaching of multiple disciplines, is that you end up, as Elizabeth Warble argues in her essay on genres, that the composition classroom sort of becomes this place that muddies the waters in terms of teaching students how to write in particular classrooms. The reason for this, she kind of underlines, is that these, what she calls mud genres, teaches, assigned, mimic genres that mediate activities in other activity systems. And this way, she doesn't like the idea that you only pick and choose little bits that sort of mimic ways of writing in other courses. Her primarily approach would probably be more towards actually teaching to write. And in this sort of regard, she sort of points out towards the end of her essay that the general issue that part of the composition classroom to teach students to write in multiple genres. Teachers are asked to teach students about and prepare them for the genres of other disciplines. And it is very difficult to do this because I think you don't fully see how students are going to use this knowledge in future classrooms. You could possibly do a survey in the class and thus mediate the sort of needs of the individual students by understanding what their majors are. However, I think that this would be a bit of an issue because first year comp is taken as a introductory course at the beginning of this university life, and in this way it's difficult to assess where students will end up. Some may come in having already decided what their majors are, some may not, but then those who might already have their majors thought out might decide that they're inconvenienced by such major in the long run and might choose to change their majors. So therefore, it's very difficult to try and assess the best way to look at teaching writing to a particular discipline. And a lot of times we have, as discussed in my course, that the administration often feels that it has the best ideas on how to approach teaching of students writing skills, yet they don't fully comprehend the difficulties of trying to actually look at individual students' ability through selective genres or particular pedagogies like feminist writing pedagogy or cultural pedagogies. The students can develop the sort of skills that will go ahead and help them in the long run, but the individual might not fully comprehend how this would work. Speaking from personal experience, as I was reading Ferguson's essay, I realized myself that one of my favorite professors had actually used a critical cultural studies approach and not even realized this. And yet this is what I always thought, that he had only used one particular type of pedagogy, which was progress theory. For other students, I feel that it might be possible that they might feel that the classroom experience may be just one-sided. Say you have an engineering student who is engineering, or even a hard sciences individual in a first year comp who might not look at the advantages of the writing. I remember one. I'm thinking of an instance where a student passed by me once who noted how irrelevant it is for them to take humanities courses even though she was a STEM major. And at the time I didn't quite think about this, but then I learned how MIT themselves has a very, very good writing program, because they understand that these individuals will need to have the abilities to write out proposals, to write out their research notes in a way that is comprehensible to the rest of academia and be able to produce. Therefore, it should be an objective for the first year comp to focus in on making sure that the students actually get a proper, primarily in writing. Now, process pedagogy itself, I think, is one of the better options in the first year composition course. However, in some ways, I think it is limited because the the examples, it lacks example. This is why in his essay, Chris Anson on process theory pedagogy kind of points out that the research done by Dowell and Warble, who instead of introducing students to particular methods, their course engages them in an interrogatory of writing and literacy that helps to bring to the surface tacitly held beliefs and unexamined practices, thus bringing scholarship to the classroom. However, as Jesse Moore points out, along with Anson, it's still very difficult to try to assess the transferability of these sets of skills. The primarily issue for me isn't necessarily that the information wouldn't be transferable for the students in life. However, the key problem still remains that these skills need to be transferred over to different realms of academia. The greater implication now when it comes with dealing with transfers, personally for me, comes down to its effectiveness when first year comp is put in place in the community college level courses. I think ultimately the biggest hurdle that academia has to go over is understanding that there is no perfect way to teach students compositional skills. The best thing that I think we should be done is that academics should look at these multiple ways of teaching and work towards an incorporation method that will allow for students to gain a better understanding of writing skills, but also not to sort of muddle the waters and make things difficult for themselves by selectively choosing one particular type of pedagogy that should work for everyone. I've noticed that many of my colleagues in my course have actually taken this kind of approach, and I think it is a very good approach to take to go off on one type of pedagogy that you feel strongly about, but not neglect the abilities and positive outcomes of other pedagogies. Now, this clearly does not end the systematic issue of determining the best practices to take in first year compositional classes, but it is a stepping stone towards understanding a way to teach students to better their writing and can hopefully transfer well to other academic writing.